Now, I'm going to jump a little bit to the 1870s because that's not that much. It's, 1860 something to 1870. I mean, it's not much. The French had a problem. They thought they would have to fight the British. The British had a navy. They had a big navy. The French didn't. They weren't going to get a navy big enough to deal with the British Navy. They wanted to figure out how to defeat the British without going capital ship to capital ship or having an amphibious force, which they did not have. About this time, this was popular. How many of you seen Walt Disney's 2,000 Leagues Under the Sea? Okay, well, it's worth, get it on Netflix. I don't know where they have it. It's fun. Very popular. It took root with a school called the Jeune École, which is basically the new school. Military trying to figure out how to leverage this and invent submarines, basically. I mean, we had submarines, but they didn't really work. And torpedo boats to basically starve the British into submission. I use that term of art. Now, that's a little bit worse than anything Sherman did. He wasn't interested in doing that. But the French, a little more radical. They were quite serious in the development of this. I mean, a lot of people dismiss the French and their military science. It's a mistake. They're ahead of the Germans in almost every respect through the Second World, to the beginning of the Second World War. The things they devised were clever. They were very good. They were better in many respects than German things. That said, the Germans had a certain way of getting done and keeping to it that, well, the French not so much. They put together a fleet. If you take a look here, I don't know if this works. Oh, it does. You can't really see it, but this is in 1898. That is a battleship. How many of you, we're going to talk about it, you ever see Billy Mitchell's bomber bombing a battleship, right? And that was a big deal. Well, this was a big deal. This was the Billy Mitchell of the turn of the century. That a submarine could sink a capital ship was really revelatory, all right? They did it first. They had this fleet. This became a threat next. The Hague had conventions in 1899, 1907, where they basically said, okay, this is going to be a problem in war. We do not want the submarines to go after anything but naval combatants. Problem. Allies started to use civil transports to put military goods. The Germans used this as an excuse to do unrestricted warfare with the submarines. And in 1917, they pretty much almost got to breaking the back of the Great Britain. However, a lot of really ingenious things came to deal with this threat. Hydrophones, crude sonar, depth charges, mining, convoys, air patrols, destroyers, depth charges. All of that was developed. This did not become the strategic weapon the French hoped it would be, or the Germans planned it to be. But that was their intent. All right. Meanwhile, on the home front, we had this horrible situation going on. This is the Battle of the Somme. This is a kind of why people became very cynical about fighting wars afterwards. This was awful. This was a failure at every level of imagination, generalship, and everything else. Nobody seemed to know what they were doing, and so they did a lot of it, and it was deadly. Here's a 4-month campaign. 300,000 plus died. Can anyone guess what was accomplished as far as territory taken as a result of all of this bloodshed? can get it wrong. Go ahead. Very good. 7 miles along a 19-mile front. This is why a lot of people wanted their money back. You know, they were looking at this going, you have got to be kidding. We're going to do the war this way? There was a premium immediately placed after thinking about this for even just a while about how to jump over the front lines. This was the first effort. You can see a Gotha, this is not Gotha, excuse me, a Zeppelin, a German Zeppelin. And they did 3 years of raids on places like London. But the rate of success was pretty low. First of all, that's a pretty big target for even a small air fighter to find. It's kind of like, hi, shoot me, okay? So a lot of these things went down. The other thing is, you'll notice that there's a lot of surface area on that object. It better not be windy. You know what happens when it's windy? You go off course. Sometimes they couldn't even find London. So they did 3 years, some 557 raids, excuse me, 51 raids. They would be lucky if they killed about 10 people per raid, all right? But they meant to do harm. This is the next step. It was a bomber called the Gotha bomber. And in the first bombing of London, 90 interceptor fighters came up. Does anybody know how many Gotha bombers were shot down as a result? It's a real simple political number. 0. By the way, infinity and 0 are the numbers of trade within Washington. All other numbers are, people get headaches about, but they love talking about infinite and 0. It's the reason we're in trouble. All that other number stuff gets lost. But it was 0, and that made quite an impression. You'll hear later, I think Mr. Baldwin talked about how the bomber will always get through. It was because of this experience. In any case, they had more luck, more accuracy, for one thing. They were able to, in a year, you know, kill almost 1,000 people. That made more of a fashion statement. They had to put air, sort of barrage balloons up. They had interceptors. But what really put this out of commission was bombing the bases. And we'll get to that later in the Second World War and during the Cold War. Very important point. The only other thing that was a takeaway, I think, is that because of the interceptors, these planes did night bombing. And we'll get to that almost immediately in the 1940s. That's very significant. They didn't want to be seen, and that has consequences as far as being able to see what you're bombing.